Thank you, John, for filling in, and thank you, everybody, for waiting just a little bit as we enjoyed a potluck lunch. And we're going to get right into it today. And the first thing we will do is invite Liz Thompson again forward from Impact Hope. And she'll share a little bit more, and we'll have a video. And then after Liz is done, we'll go right into our final presentation from Carl Wilkens. And at the end of that, we'll have opportunity once again for those online to ask questions as well as those in the audience. So let's begin. I'll start with a word of prayer and then pass it over to Liz. Dear God in heaven, as we reflect on the lessons learned from Rwanda on an individual level, and then right now on a more national level, may we see from our standpoint right here in this sphere the importance of recognizing the path, the way of love that Jesus demonstrates. Give us empathy, not just for our family and friends, but help us to see every human being in the image of God. We pray all this in your name. Amen.
Good afternoon. A little short, so I'll put that down. Let's see. Gummy, I have this here. Are we ready? Okay, great. What a great potluck. Somebody brought one of my favorite dishes, and that's cottage cheese loaf. You guys like that? Man, it's one of the best. I could smell it when I was sitting over here. So wonderful. Anyway. Thank you so much for letting us come and to be able to share a little bit about the work that's happening with kids who are sitting in refugee camps right now in Rwanda. So you have these 6 camps that have been created in the last 30 years from the people that were fleeing the country of the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, because they were starting to be killed in that country. So they fled for their life into Rwanda. Rwandan government welcomed them and gave them refuge. And so during that time, most of these people thought, okay, maybe I'll be here for a month or 2 and we'll get back to our homes and our cattle and our farms. And it never happened. They're still sitting in camps. So many of these people had their children in these mud homes in Rwanda. Rwanda is known as a country of 1,000 hills. And let me tell you, there are 1,000 hills in Rwanda, and it's beautiful. There's very little flat land. Farming happens all up and down the mountains in Rwanda, and it's very beautiful. In 1 Samuel 2:8, it says, "He lifts the poor from the dust and raises the needy from their misery. He makes them companions of princes and puts them in places of honor. The foundations of the earth belong to the Lord, and on them he has built the world." What I love about the Bible is it gives us this hope that for those that are suffering, that are truly suffering and living in a place where they can't even get themselves out, they get these scriptures that the Lord has given and can hold on to those. And the wonderful thing is he gives us the privilege to be able to help them. And so right now, Impact Hope is an organization that started in 2015 that is bringing hope to refugees in Rwanda. These kids, past the 9th grade, had no education. So they come over fleeing the Congo. Their parents have been killed, or some of them have been. They've like he said, the unimaginable torture and things that have happened to them. And so they want to find hope somewhere. And there's no hope past 9th grade. So these kids are sitting in the camps and they're saying, what are we going to do? This can't be our life. And so what happened is these high school and kids that just finished high school they got together in the Kiziba camp and they said, let's build our own school. And they got excited. So this is the literal school that they built from mud and sticks back in the late 2000s. And they put on it Hope School because they needed hope and they didn't have any. So what they did is they went around the camp looking for people who were teachers in the Congo previously. And they said, would you please come into this little school, and would you teach us? We want an education. We want to learn. We need hope. And so they found these teachers. This is Francois. Francois was there for years, and she would teach these kids. There was about 204 of them that dedicated themselves to getting another higher education. And Francois was there, and later on, Francois went to the university through Impact Hope to get her degree. So it's a beautiful story. So Francois was there with these kids, and from 2009 until 2015, they were going through all the steps and the years of high school. In 2015, the government steps in and says, we're shutting the Hope School down. Can you imagine the devastation of these kids who were just finishing and about to take their national exams so that they can go on to university? And the government said, you have to start over. You have to go to the schools that are outside the camp, and most of them were miles away, and so many kids dropped out. And you know what happens with teenagers when they have nothing to do, and you're in tight spaces? Not great things happened. And some of the girls ended up pregnant. Those that weren't able to support themselves, they live a life that is unbecoming. And so in Rwanda, there are Adventist boarding schools all around the country, and there are 6 refugee camps that are spread out around the country. So the country, like Carl said, is not very big, but there are over 12 million people in this place. So the camps themselves, one of the camps in the north had to shut down because it was falling off the side of the mountain, because they live on mountains, and it was sliding off. So what happened is they moved it down to the Mahama camp in the southeast. There are 65,000 people living in a small space in the Mahama camp. This is where Impact Hope came in. Our founders discovered these kids and heard about this Hope School. They went to meet them. They met these kids, and these kids said, will you please help us? And they said, Lord, I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to go home, and we're going to find sponsors for these kids, and we're going to take them out of these camps and put them in Adventist boarding schools. And that's what they did, 204 of them. And that's when Impact Hope started in 2016. So they took these kids out of the camps. And I'll tell you, there are other aid organizations that go in and try to help. But guess what they didn't do? They didn't provide funding for their uniforms or transportation to get out of the camp and go to the school. Those kids didn't go because literally they were living on 11 cents a day and had no money to be able to put into a uniform or transportation to get to the school. And it was heartbreaking. Impact Hope was the first organization that went in and brought in those school buses and actually transported them to the school. And the first time those buses rolled into the camp, one of our directors, she said tears were coming out of her eyes, and those of the people that were trying to help these kids get into school, because this had never happened before. And I praise the Lord that he just gives us the opportunity and gives us the wisdom on what to do and how to help these kids. These are some of the kids that go to the Gahogo Adventist School. And
I was born in Democratic Republic of Congo.
I'll share this with you now.
That's where I just grew.
Go ahead. We'll go ahead with the video.
I was born in Democratic Republic of Congo. That's where I just grew up, and I was very good at math and French. And I used to be the first in the class. Everything was good, except I used to see people getting severely ill, and even some of them just die in their homes because they couldn't get a closer healthcare setting. That inspired me to go with OBGYN, and I developed this vision of maybe someday, it is my long-term goal, having like a clinic that provide easily accessible and affordable healthcare to mothers and also kids. You know, I was studying, everything was fine. I thought I was going to pursue my dream. Everything was okay, we had cattle.
This is where we find Jackson and his family, just constantly in fear of what tomorrow's gonna bring. Am I gonna survive? And there's a militia that has come into his town and has begun shooting people.
They could just find you at the way, maybe cultivating, and then they just take your goat or your cow, and if you try to discuss with them, they could immediately shoot you.
This is when they made the decision to come to Rwanda to escape that life where they never know what will happen next and who will be killed next.
And then we got in Kigeme refugee camp, located in southern part of Rwanda. I left everything. We left the treasure that could be used to pay for my medical school. So I thought everything has faded. I was really hopeless. I thought, oh my goodness, now my dream has disappeared.
These refugee camps are home to some of the most brilliant students in Rwanda, but it's also home to some of the most impoverished people and pain that you will find.
When you are a refugee in the community, you kind of have this inferiority complex. You say, oh, I'm a refugee, and others, these guys are coming from rich families. So you just like feel you are inferior.
You try to mingle as much as you can with the host community so that they may not know you and start labeling you or giving you names. People had to live the life of hiding their identity.
When someone's looking at a refugee camp and seeing 100,000 people sitting with nothing to do, it might be easy to say they're not educated, they must not be very smart. But honestly, that is about as far from the truth as it could be. There are many, many students in the refugee camps who are scoring very high in their national examinations. Jackson was one of those students.
I started being the first in the whole senior 3 classmates in the school. But we didn't have somebody to pay for senior 4. Though I had good grades, but I didn't have somebody to sponsor me at that time.
So as a sophomore in high school, Jackson began walking with other students to the nearest high school was 12 kilometers away, one direction. Then, when he's finished with his classes in the afternoon, walk those 12 kilometers back home, sometimes in the pouring rain, and sometimes by the time he arrived home, food had already been eaten for the day, and it would be dark, and so there's no lights in the camps to study by, and there's no opportunity to excel.
I was going again to sit at home because I didn't have somebody to help me. I felt like desperate, you know. Though I was happy because of my performance, but on the other hand, I was like sad. So I felt like I was hopeless again.
What Jackson and his friends needed was someone to give them an opportunity to study beyond just walking to school. They needed boarding school.
That's why I found somebody to come and help us, and that was Impact Hope. Yeah.
Impact Hope found out about the refugees in Rwanda in 2015. In January of 2016, we had been able to find funding for 204 Impact Hope students to attend boarding school in safe Christian boarding schools.
So they said, okay, so prepare yourself. Monday, tomorrow, we're going to take you to the school, Gahogo Adventist Academy. It's an Adventist high school. We used to say, if somebody goes to the boarding school, that kid is successful and is really smart. So finding myself in that situation, I was like, oh my goodness, now I'm smart and I was kind of successful because I'm going to the boarding school. Imagine we could just sit there, eat something very good. We could study very well as we dreamed before. Somewhere, just in a peaceful place, you could not hear a gunshot. No, you could not hear that. So the lifestyle was just to study in a favorable condition.
Jackson always did well. And when we'd come and visit Gahogo Adventist Academy, where Jackson was studying, he was one of those students who was a real leader, who always would interpret for us, who was up front, and he was such a kind soul. It wasn't until a little later that I learned that Jackson wanted to be a doctor.
Just I used to see different people sick. I would like to be the doctor so that even I can care for other people. That's my wish.
Jackson graduated high school with Impact Hope, and then he was scoring so high on his college entrance exams that Impact Hope knew we had to step up and find a sponsor to support him. Well, Jackson wanted to be a physician, so he took the exams to become a doctor, and he was accepted into the best school in Rwanda, which is the University of Rwanda Medical School.
I'm happy to say that Jackson graduated last month, and he is now a medical doctor, and he's hired by the Ministry of Health in Rwanda. And he's living his dream because people just like you helped Jackson have a chance. There are many more kids that need help in Rwanda. Not all of them will go to university or even have that chance. Most of them, in fact, will need a trade. They'll need to learn a skill because there isn't any other hope for them. Refugees, even if they get educated, usually don't get picked for jobs. And so Impact Hope's goal is to teach them a skill and a trade so that they can open a small business. So tailoring is one of those, and you'll see this apron here was made by a man named Kabera, who graduated from our tailoring program. And this little heart right here zips open into a tote bag. And these are actually a gift when you decide to sponsor one of our students in our program. So we're happy to be able to share the things that they made. So in the summer, we have a short trade program for 4 weeks while they're in high school so that they can learn and start understanding what a trade would look like and what a small business would be if they could earn money. This is the serious group. There's 4 boys that opened a bakery in southern Rwanda, and they had this 4-foot-high machine, or 3-foot-high. It was huge. And these boys were very successful in making bread in a community that didn't have a bakery. This is the Mukamira Tailoring Center, so when the kids graduate with their certified tailoring trade, they go here to Mukamira Tailoring Center and they do an internship. Now, the next step where you come in is the Kigali Tailoring Center. So this is what we are raising funds for Giving Tuesday this year, so that we can launch this community center in Kigali. And it will house from 70 to 100 of our graduates, and we will employ them in tailoring business. And they will be able to produce things and actually be able to feed their families and have a future and learn a business skill. And do not forget to do good and share with others, for with such sacrifices, God is pleased. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we can do something, and we should do something. Whether it's helping Carl with his ministry, whether it's sponsoring a student in Impact Hope, or helping your neighbor who really could use some help. And sometimes we just look the other way, don't we? I'm right there too. I understand. But the Lord says in the Bible, sometimes you just need to do good. And he teaches us what to do. So thank you for letting me share. I really appreciate it. Impact Hope is a ministry that you can come see us out at the table, and also follow us online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thank you, Liz, and we'll pass it over to Pastor Carl.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you, folks up there. Many countries where refugees are, they're held kind of like in the refugee camp is almost like a prison. They're not allowed to go out and move about. I've always been impressed that from a country where 1 out of 7 million people were killed, that it has become the host to a safe place in the region instead of a place of continuing violence. And these camps that the students, I was so excited when I learned that the students would be able to go out of the camps and study in the schools, go out and get jobs in Rwanda. You know, jobs, everybody's protective of competing job markets and things of that nature. And so I don't know how many years ago, I was in that little school, Liz, Hope School there, and was talking with some of the seniors were taking me around the camp, and they had started school in first grade, so they'd been there for all 12 years of their education. But I loved a couple of them that I was talking with. They were wanting to get training, and they still had their goal of going home, back to the DRC. You know, everybody hoping that there will be peace that will come one day, and that our training and what we've received here can go out there. And I think that's part of Rwanda government's thinking too, is that, you know, we help to educate and equip these young people. We're going to have a better neighbor next door, a more secure place. So I think I need to hook my phone up here now to the system. I forgot I didn't do that. There we go. And that should be sending a signal. Man, our team up in the balcony is remarkable. Thank you folks so much. Wish we could all travel together and be a team. I hadn't put together the pieces that Pastor Andreas had been here before going to Walla Walla, because it was several years ago. I remember I was working on a little Kubota tractor trying to figure out the glow plugs and listening to a sermon of Pastor Andreas at Walla Walla. And he was talking about this parable of Jesus. And it's a great sermon. I highly recommend if you get a chance to listen to it. But we're all, I'm sure, super familiar with the basic story. The landowner that goes in early in the morning, mid-morning, and noon, and he keeps hiring people to come work in his vineyard. And then when it comes time to be paid at the end, I love the way, the way a story is told is just so crucial to how much we retain it. And our brain is a story animal. I mean, it loves stories. It's like everything. I always say, you want to send something home, you wrap it in a story. And of course, that's the way Jesus rolled. And so the people who come last get paid first, but they get paid the same as the promised for the people who were hired first. So the ones who are hired first, what are they thinking? Whoa, if those guys got paid like we were supposed to, it's gonna be good. And then they get there and they're like, what? We're paid the same? And it's just, that's not fair. And that idea of that's not fair is, to me, a massive obstacle to overcome, because we grow up with this really deep core belief that, like, at the top of the pyramid is fairness. If we want something to be sustainable, and it's got to be fair. And then you come up against some things when fair doesn't this transactional, you do this and you get that, just doesn't work. Doesn't break the cycle of violence, doesn't really lead to healing. So we enter into this world of transformative change. Can change really happen? Rwanda, after the genocide, some say 200. There's a lot of different figures out there as I've looked around. I just kind of took a middle of the road figure, 300,000 people. Because, many were in the Congo, so we don't even know how many are there. But in Rwanda's prisons, at certain points, kind of shortly after the genocide, there were somewhere in the neighborhood 200,000-300,000 people in prison. Now, to do a regular, and this is just my simple, it's a super simple illustration of a justice system. We find out who's to blame, we punish, and we hope to achieve justice. But in Rwanda, there just weren't enough judges, there weren't enough lawyers, not enough money, not enough time. It would take you more than 100 years. So Rwanda went back to something they'd been doing literally for hundreds of years in the country. They call it gacaca, G-A-C-A-C-A. Let me illustrate it to you this way. I have a friend who's an English professor in New York, Rwandan gentleman. He got a Fulbright scholarship when he was in Rwanda just before the genocide. And he came to America for that Fulbright scholarship. The genocide hits, kills so much of his family. He continues working in America. And as Rwanda is trying to put the pieces back together, he hears this word that they're going to use gacaca for people who committed genocide. Now here's his explanation to me. He says, when I thought of gacaca, he says, I thought of when I was a teenager, my aunt and uncle were having marriage problems. The family got together, the elders of the family got together. How can we help fix this? How can we preserve this home? He's like, that's gacaca, And traditionally you hear about the village elders coming together on the grass, and there's a lot of beautiful stories around it. But he's like, how are you going to do gacaca for people who commit genocide? He was just a Rwandan who understood the culture. So this is an idea that for many people, they just couldn't imagine something that big. They couldn't imagine how it could play out. And these are not drawings from the Rwandan government or textbook or anything. This is just me sitting down at my iPad and trying to figure out how, and as I'm learning the stories and I'm back in the country and I'm reading and listening to podcasts, if some of you are really into what happened in Rwanda's gacaca. In the Holocaust, in the Cambodian genocide, they're like, we can't prosecute the thousands and thousands of ordinary people. It's just impossible, people thought. We'll be lucky if we can catch the leaders, of these horrible events. But Rwanda basically took the philosophy that ordinary people have been empowered to kill their neighbor in genocide. Ordinary people can be empowered to heal their country. And so instead of, and this is kind of as I understand, the framework of restorative thinking, that we need to know who's responsible, but we're not looking to just catch them and punish them. We're trying to understand the harm of those most impacted, but also the harm of the perpetrator. What harm happened to them? What harm happens continuously down the road in these cycles of harm? And because we can't begin to hope to repair it if we don't understand the harm. And we can't really unpack the harm, the murder, the rape, the horrors, if we don't have a safe place to unpack it. So this whole idea, I was talking with teachers last week in Long Island about a circle meeting in the morning, every morning with your students, where you're building connection and community in the classroom. So when harm happens, we have social money in the bank, so to speak. We have a community. So Rwanda is going to spend time. Here's a practical example. When I first went back in 2005, so we left in 96, we were there for a year and a half after the genocide. And then when I went back in 2005 and each subsequent years afterwards, I was seeing these soldiers on all the street corners in the capital city. And I'm like, is this place about to blow again? What's up? Soldiers all over the place? No, it's a very intentional program for years of reestablish or trying to rebuild trust in the military. The military had taken part in genocide. So you see a uniform, you think genocide. Well, here you see a uniform, you think safety and security. There's a hit and run accident. One soldier on one police is on one corner is on his radio calling a soldier down at another corner to catch this vehicle and the hit and run. They have, I want to say 2 days, but I also want to say 2 weeks. But they have significant time every year where soldiers are working in the community side by side with community members, building homes, nurses and physicians in the military working alongside nurses and physicians in clinics. So all of this intentional, building a safe, secure place where we can then unpack the harm and repair. Because I think most of us, I never have gotten any pushback. There's not a lot of people that believe that this system regularly breaks the cycle of violence or leads to healing. And so I don't really like my drawing in some ways that it's kind of like this or that. It's not, I need to, I don't know, one student was suggesting last week some arrows here. This, to me, just doesn't go far enough. And so Rwanda sets up these courts. Now, I want to be mindful of our time here. President Kagame is going to, he's not the first president after the genocide. They tried to have the majority Hutu group have a president, but the president, according to things that I've read, I wasn't there in those first, well, yeah, we were there for a year and a half after, but I wasn't there for the lion's share of the time. That president was just doing like so many other leaders around the world do, padding his own pockets and building his own network and things like that. Not the interest of the people at heart, the ordinary people at heart. So when President Kagame does eventually become president, decisions are made to make a radical change from a punitive blame mindset to a restorative healing mindset. And there's several quotes. We were just talking about refugees, Liz. He says, I grew up in a refugee camp in Uganda. I lived there for 30 years. Shapes one's character. Africa's story, this is my favorite, has been written by others. We need to own our problems and solutions and write our own story. So one of the ways that they are preparing the ground for restorative thinking is in their constitution. They say a third of every decision-making groups, a third of every decision, minimum of a third has to be women. Minimum of a third of the parliament has to be women. The other 2/3, men and women compete. And there's more than 60% of the parliament today that are women in Rwanda. So the role of women, just huge. I would love to just go off on that this afternoon, but I'll stop there. Did away with the death penalty. It was on the books in Rwanda. They had all the reason, they had all the infrastructure there to execute people who committed, at least leaders who committed genocide. But they realized that they did some, and they realized those executions were not going to lead them to healing. They weren't going to lead them to break the cycle of violence. And so they will set up more than 12,000 community courts. And these community courts will have 9 judges. At the beginning, they had 15. They realized, Rwanda, one of the things I appreciate is they start something, then they evaluate, reevaluate, adjust. How can we improve? Next step, moving forward. And so at least 3 of those 9 judges that are picked by the community have to be women. And you go through a genocide, you kind of have an idea who you can trust and who you can't trust. And so this is usually on a soccer field. Soccer field is by a school, so we'll grab a couple tables out of the school. We'll bring them out here, typically on a Thursday afternoon. Closed school, closed businesses. Everybody kind of encouraged, order slashed. There's an interesting dynamic of authority and decentralization of government in Rwanda, which you might think are kind of conflicting ideas. Authority trying to hold all the power in here, but no, we are working to empower our population. I think one of the crimes of colonialism was this message: you can't solve problems yourself. So Rwanda is going to set up more than 12,000 of these courts. The community will hear a prisoner who chooses, this is voluntary, chooses to confess, and then they will talk about what happened in this particular crime, in this particular case. So these judges, regular lawyers and judges can be in the community, but they can't be here. This is a people movement in Rwanda. And they will try over the course of 10 years more than 1.9 million cases. Not people, because each person could have more than one case, okay? And so these little community courts are scattered all over the country. I'm trying to figure out what color font and what kind of, I just really wanted to stress it's opportunity. It is not guarantee. It's not a formula guaranteed for this output. This is an opportunity for those who want to do it. The judges then can then decide, is this person safe to go work in the community, or should we send them back to prison? And of these 12,000 courts, some of them had a higher percentage they sent back to prison than to work in the community. Others, vice versa. I think, if I'm remembering right, it was like 14% of the cases were acquitted. And I wondered how many would be acquitted if there were no women judges in there. So all kinds of questions and interesting stuff there. But we're trying to learn the truth, because if these flowers represent healing, there's often barriers that get in our way to healing, and one of them is acceptance. And you might think, well, how could they not accept their family's dead? But my family didn't deserve to. This was preventable. I'm not even sure they're dead. I don't know where they're buried. All kinds of things. So learning the truth is so crucial. Even if a prisoner is coming, because you could get your time cut in half if you choose not the conventional, but the restorative. So even if they're just trying to play the system, learning the truth still has a value. A confession still has value, even from somebody who's not sorry. I feel bad right now. I got a little voice in the back of my head saying, slow down, and it's a lot of material, but we've been over a lot too already the weekend, and I don't want to I'm afraid that it's a lot of energy. And so they will, for the vast majority of the people, they will send them out to work in the community. Now get this, if I just said one or two sentences, and maybe I'll try to stop with that. This is not payback. You cannot pay back for killing, for raping. This is not justice. This is a chance for people to reinvent themselves. It's a chance for the community to reinvent themselves and to reinvent in their mind the people who they have seen for 3 months as, and some of them not even 3 months, but as killers and perpetrators. So this is a massive opportunity to rewire your brain, to rewire the country, which is really a bold and ambitious idea. Who did they think they were? When experts heard that they were going to do community courts, they're like, your country is going to explode. You've got to have the death penalty. That's the only way you'll stop this violence, was advice they were getting from the outside. But no, these guys said, no, we believe in our community, in our people. We can find healing. We can reinvent ourselves. So I'm explaining this to some students, and it's interesting because it happened a couple years ago, and so I put the student's question up here, and then it just happened last week on Long Island. Before I even had that on the screen, a student said to me, wait a minute, that's not fair. And I'm like, you're right, it's not fair. People who do genocide get community, that's not fair. But fair is not breaking the cycle of violence. Fair is not leading to healing. We're not throwing it out. And this is why, with a little more time, we could begin. I got so excited a couple weeks ago. You know, YouTube has algorithms, right? So you search one thing and then you see a bunch of other things. And sometimes we're pretty negative about it, which I understand. But there's some positive stuff. I've learned a lot of things I wouldn't have even known about Brian McLaren, except that the algorithm brought him up. Here's his idea. Life and development and growth, he talks particularly with the Christian community, faith is like the rings of a tree. The first ring is simplicity. The second ring, as it grows out, is complexity. The third ring is perplexity. Simplicity, good guys, bad guys. Oh, and then you find out, well, wait a minute. We thought the other church didn't have any truth or good people. And oh, there are good people and truth in the other. Complexity comes. Then you run into something like a genocide and perplexity. And you're really wrestling with different questions. If I am always struggling to get it simple and clear, black and white, I miss the beauty of complexity, perplexity. You know what his fourth ring is? Harmony. Somebody who is curious, searching to embrace complexity and perplexity, their chance of beauty and harmony. Anyway, what got me there was just this whole idea of it is so much simpler, we think, to stay in a transactional mindset. But I would say, and it's interesting, when I first started putting some of this out, there's a genocide scholar, he's known all around the world for his work, amazing man, Greg Stanton. And I sent some of this stuff to Greg, and Greg goes, Carl, you know that's the gospel. And I'll say, I think so, Greg. I think so. What would it take to get somebody like Maria, and you weren't here, some of you maybe for this morning's meeting, but Maria lost her husband and son, and she entered into a transformative healing journey with the guy who was in the gang who killed her husband and sons. What could get Maria to let go of her right to transactional and actually buy into a transformative model? And this is typically where I unashamedly just interrupt the whole show to brag about our grandsons. It's so funny. He's like, can I have some? And his little brother's like, drive, and then I'll feed you. Okay. Thank you. Can you think of anything you wouldn't do for your grandkids? Would you give up your right to transactional justice if there was a hope that these kids could have a better tomorrow, that you could break cycles of violence? That's just one way to look at this idea of why we would let go. At times, we don't let go of it at all. That's why I said I don't like my drawings where it's kind of either or. There's a combination that's there. There is a place for transactional thinking. There's a place for fair, definitely a place for consequences. And we might look at community service and say that's not a fair consequence for genocide, and I agree. But sometimes we're also looking at reinventing. We're moving from simple to complex to perplex to hopefully a place of harmony. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I think we're planning about maybe 10 or 15 minutes for some questions, if you have. I'm asking myself the question, when in my life am I cheating myself or robbing myself by allowing transactional thinking to be the dominant thinking in my brain instead of transformative? And I'll give you a short, quick little family example. Our daughters, when they were teenagers, got training as lifeguards and swim instructors. And they wanted a summer job where they were working at a local pool in town, guarding and teaching swimming. So Dad's transactional brain says, okay, guys, I like that idea, but it's about 30 miles away. You're going to do minimum wage. It's going to be 4 hours a day. You'll spend all your earnings on gas money. Transactional thinking, right? But fortunately, Dad didn't win. And in the middle of summer, one of our daughters has a cap from Acapulco. And I'm like, hey, that's a cool hat. Where'd you get that? One of my swimming students brought it to me. She went on vacation. Transformative. You see, this summer's work wasn't about gas and that's part. We got to keep transactional. There's a role. But it's when are we missing transformative? And then we could spend a lovely time together looking at what Jesus had to say. Looking honestly at some things we might be calling transformative that are actually transactional, and really embracing the transformative beauty of love and a grace. These women in Rwanda that you remember, well, some of you who were with us in the morning, we were in a session about Maria and Filbert and this unity and reconciliation community. This basically, not unity, just reconciliation community. And the ladies there, these kids from Chicago were asking the ladies in that group, what about God? And one of the ladies said, well, at the beginning of the genocide, we thought God just forgot us. It got worse, and we thought God doesn't like us anymore. It got even worse, and we decided we didn't like God. And she just kind of quit. But to the credit of this young man from Chicago, he says, but then what? And the lady kind of chuckles, and she says, we got really lonely, and we decided to try God again. And in that, they made this statement: it is our pain that drives us deeper into love. This is the life raft. This is the lifeboat. This is our hope when everything else seems to have failed, is this transformative, at times illogical thing called unconditional love. What I shared with you at church, God's always with me. God takes great delight in me. God's love calms my heart. God is everything I need for every situation. God's my shepherd and redeemer. I'm talking with some teachers at a Catholic high school in San Francisco. We went to dinner with their spouses, and we're talking about Gregoire. And I said to them, this thing that I put up here earlier today, this has got to be larger than Christianity. Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on God, much less, love and stuff, but I'm not sure how to word it. And one of the teacher's wives was in social work, and she said, tell me those 5 things again. And we wrote them on a napkin there in that restaurant. And she looked at that list, and she said, Carl, that's unconditional love. However we have experienced unconditional love, whoever has demonstrated it to us, that is our key to a transformative way of thinking. So, where shall we go, Pastor Kevin?
Thank you so much, Carl. We will give it open to the audience here in person and also those online. There's going to be a QR code. You can take your phone and click that for those watching at home, or also Gumi will put the link in the YouTube comment, and I'll see it on my phone if there's any questions from those watching online. But right here now, is there anybody that has a reflection or thought for Carl as we have a little bit of a time for Q&A? And as we wait for that to warm up, I see Norman. I have a question too, though, first, maybe before Norman. As you were speaking this morning and talking about forgiving this man that committed the atrocity, Gregoire, it made me think there's that famous book called The Sunflower, and this is a whole lesson on forgiveness, where this Jewish man was confronted by a Nazi German soldier in prison, and this guy comes to him and says, will you forgive me? And Simon Wiesenthal said, no. And then his book is a reflection from religious audience asking the question, did I do the right thing? Should I have forgiven this one man on behalf of all of the Jews? And I'm just curious, in your own reflection as you continue to wrestle with this, what do you find yourself saying again and again as you reflect on it?
I always try really hard to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So anytime we're talking about something like this, as close to the heart as that is, and as deep rooted in us as that is, I just want you to know what I'm saying here is not prescriptive, it's descriptive. My experience or friends' experiences of mine. And that has been really, really important to differentiate between forgiveness and reconciliation, that they're two very different things. Forgiveness, I think there is basically a universal invitation to forgiveness, getting free from anger and bitterness. But then that other part of reconciliation, we might say, is somebody sorry? That's a question for reconciliation, not for forgiveness. Does somebody deserve it? Question for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, from my experience. Forgiveness is mostly about the person who is wronged and their healing. And do they deserve it? Yes. Do their spouses and their kids deserve it? Yes. That anger that we hang on to, it's like, okay, anger is good in protecting boundaries or reestablishing boundaries. But I think anger has a shelf life. And if anger stays beyond that value, it becomes harmful to us and to those who are closest to us. And so that's not to say that by getting free of anger and bitterness, it's a gift to us, but it is also a gift to, in the case of Maria and Filbert, to Filbert, because, and of course there we were talking both forgiveness and reconciliation, but that is a gift we can give. It's wonderful to be part of making somebody beautiful again. And so I really do believe that forgiveness, and I like to just use getting free of anger and bitterness, is a universal invitation, but it's an invitation. It should not be an expectation. It should not be a demand. We don't even know the timeline. One Holocaust scholar said at a workshop I was at, he said, some sins seem unforgivable. Some crimes, it's all that church language, some crimes seem unforgivable. And he says, I've come to the conclusion from his study and research that perhaps in this generation they might be. But I'm like, well, thank you. So we're still not saying it is unforgivable, but we recognize in this generation, we may be just working on, getting to a place where we could see them as more than one thing thinking. It just, the timeline, I think that's where God and unconditional love is so beautiful to me. When we try to establish a timeline for somebody, I think we're really messing with the beauty of the... Sean, I think I said 10 things. Did I hit one?
You got it. Thank you, Carl. Let's go to Norman.
I don't really want to abort the main thrust of your message here because I think it's pretty good. But I noticed on YouTube, on the leadership there in Rwanda, as you mentioned, the very first president wasn't so good, but the one you have now is good. But the comment on YouTube was, he's been there, seems like forever.
Right.
And some people think that if and when he dies or retires or whatever,
right,
there's a question is, will the leadership continue the good works? Because he's made Rwanda the most economically prosperous country in Africa. What do you see for the future?
I would love to spend a longer time on this, but let me just give you maybe 3 or 4 things. Number one, he doesn't do anything alone. He is a master, from my perspective, of looking around his country and looking around the globe and tapping people on the shoulder and saying, you were great there, we need you back home. Building a team back and building a sense of national identity based on values, not on regionality, ethnicity, or things like that. Now, there will always be the lens of Hutu, Tutsi, and people will always be looking at something and supporting a belief they have about this or a belief they have about that. I used to be, before the genocide, a kind of seeing is believing, show me and then I'll believe. Now I'm much more likely to say, I see what I believe, which is why it's really important to examine my beliefs, because that's so influential on what I actually see. And then I begin to support that. I affirm those different beliefs. So I think he's really good at building a team around. People talk about the Kagame regime, a very pejorative term, but it's like, no, there is so many people working all over the country for what I would say my second point, good governance. To learn what is good governance. The word politics has become all kinds of ugliness in our country and around the world. I heard one guy say, here's the original politics. If you have clean water coming out of your tap, and if you can read the ingredients on a box and your kid won't have an allergic reaction to something in there, that's good politics. Shared common good. And so I believe that they have had now a generation of good governance. Now, how many generations does it take of good governance to overcome so many generations of corrupted governance? And I would guess that could be my third point. Rwanda makes it a priority of against corruption. You're not going to bribe a police officer. You're not going to bribe a government official. we can be proud of a church that the Director General of Customs in Rwanda is a very conscientious Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And he was put in power there because he was first working in the Department of Revenue, and now he's put in power there because he is such a conscientious, caring person. And when I talk to him, he's a lovely gentleman. And when I talk to him, because he just got the job not that long ago, what's your key focus? And he says 2 things. We have to make money for the government. That's income for the government. And 2, we have to convince businesses that we are here as your partner, not as your adversary. When you do well in your business, we do well in our income generation for the government. And so that mutual relationship is there. Now, that's just a little practical example of it, but the idea that we don't have to be adversarial. Rwanda's culture is not an adversarial culture. It is a community culture. It is a we culture. The last one I'll say to your question about him being in so long, great question. When the Constitution said it was a 2-term limit and his second term was coming up, the world just automatically said he is just like every other leader, he'll never leave power. Well, from people I talked from within, Minister of Justice being one, he's not right now, he was former Minister of Justice, and it wasn't an unhappy transition out, it was just a good moving of things. He said we had to work hard on President Kagame at that point because he said, no, we will not change, the world will just, he knew what the world would say, you're just gonna hang on. But the people are looking at the DRC next door to them, they're looking at the chaos in Burundi to the south of them, I'm thinking, and they're looking, Uganda is no picture of thriving, safe hospitality. They're looking at this chaos all around, and they look at their country with low crime rates, with rights for women, with caring for the environment, and I could go on the list, and they're like, you are too young, you cannot. So I honestly believe the people amended the Constitution, not the president, and they laid on him to stay on, please. He very justifiably deserves to retire, the 4-hour nights and everything else. But when he is out of office, whether through death or any other way, my hope is that they have experienced enough good governance, that they've seen it can work. There's been enough people who've been empowered. Right now, the Prime Minister's been in for quite a few years, quite a popular character from my Rwandan friends are telling me. There's other people that I think we could go down and make a list of different people that I think would be good candidates for that. So it's really hard when America looks at a system and it's not like theirs and they want to start trashing it. And our system is adversarial politics. I heard one, she was the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Rwanda at the time she's been interviewed. She said, we practice consensual politics in Rwanda. Now, a professor I was talking to in Green Bay, he said, sounds like Quakers to me, you know. But I mean, we're so quick, I think, to jump to conclusions and throw stones. But I really think we have a lot more to learn. He is not, now you've heard all that come out of me. No, he is not a perfect man. Nobody is perfect. And what I like is when they do see mistakes that are made, they had to make genocide laws after the genocide because most countries don't have laws against genocide. Laws against killing, but just like we didn't have laws against hate crimes, you know, they made them, they recognized we did it pretty quick, we got to come back. And I was talking with an attorney who was in the country there at the invitation of Rwanda, helping them review how can we improve these genocide laws that we made pretty quickly not so long ago. So this idea of analyzing and improving, moving forward, I think there's a lot of examples of that. Thanks. I think I went off a little long because I'm super proud of what the people of Rwanda are doing. And I think the media, international media, spends an inordinate amount of time criticizing. And so I'm like, okay, I'll just be unashamedly biased in telling all the beautiful things I've seen.
We have a couple questions from online.
Okay.
And I want to look through the audience too. After this, maybe we'll go one online, one from the audience. This one is, please go into more detail how religion, Catholics/Seventh-day Adventists failed.
Okay. So I think my phone probably went off, huh, Gumi? Let me just look and see. Or did I go to sleep? Okay. At the beginning, this I think will be, kind of the most concise way I can approach this. At the beginning of the coup, when they decided to launch the genocide, April 7, 1994, I've put together the idea that there were three major obstacles to genocide that they had to get rid of. One was local government, or internal, local government officials who were not going along with genocide thinking. My world would be better without you in it. They killed the prime minister. She wasn't a Tutsi, but she wasn't going along with the extremist. The chief of police, who was a very popular character at the time, they didn't kill him. He wasn't going along with genocide. My understanding, and some of these things are just stuff I've heard from friends, so I'm not a encyclopedia documented guy. But what I understood, and again, I think it's what makes sense that's important for us. What can we learn from it, whether I have a few details wrong or not? But the chief of police was moved out of the country. So you see, they're looking at the people within government that are not with them. Some they're killing. If they killed the chief of police, I think they would have had too hard a time controlling the police force there. So they're very strategic in getting rid of the people in the government who don't go along with genocide. They then needed to get rid of the 2,500 UN soldiers, and they killed 10 Belgian UN soldiers, and that's a much longer story, but they managed to get rid of all the UN soldiers, mostly. A small group stayed on a humanitarian mission. You get rid of the UN soldiers, and then you get rid of the foreign community. So three groups, internal in the government, the UN who were there armed, and I say, not just me, many say, we're able to have stopped that genocide, and all the foreigners. I wish there would have been a fourth one that would have said 80% of the people in this country go to church every week. We'll never be able to commit genocide with all of those churchgoers. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So instead of saying, how are we going to fight the church? They had been working years ahead, and power is power. People within church, people outside of church, people in business, they like power. All of us, we do. And I'm not saying we're just all a bunch of evil creatures, because I still believe the extension of the heart of God in all of us, but we're often scared. And we look for security in places where it's not. And so they will use the infrastructure of the church buildings. The church was always seen as a safe place in years before the genocide. People would flee there when they were being attacked, and they would be kept safe at the church. But at the time of the genocide, no. The churches became slaughterhouses. Was that the will of the leadership of the different churches? I doubt it. But we don't have stories of the leadership standing up and saying no. I'm not saying they wanted it, but we don't have stories of them standing up and saying no. We don't have stories of people before. I myself have wrestled with, I was so busy building schools, and then we were working in displaced camps and stuff like that. I look back at that and I'm like, Carl, why didn't you see this storm coming? Well, I didn't speak Kinyarwanda. Again, that's on me. My employer said you have to learn French. Well, they didn't say I couldn't learn Kinyarwanda, but I'm like, I didn't make it a priority. But definitely the leaders of the church spoke Kinyarwanda. They knew what was going on. So were we preaching in our churches before this genocide? Not just love your neighbor, love your enemy? It's not what I heard in Rwanda happen. In fact, we heard more stories of church leadership using the pulpit as advocating for this genocide. There's a famous leader of the church, become infamous leader of the church, who was convicted by the UN for his role. And there's people who testified of being in the baptistry hiding during the genocide while he was preaching their extermination. Now, I would like to think that's rare. I don't know how common it was, but what we still know is that there was not a reputation counter it was like we can use the infrastructure, we can use the leadership to accomplish this. So we don't have to get rid of the church. We can use the church to do that. Maybe that's where I'll stop for that question. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Anyone else from the audience?
I'm not satisfied with my answer. Just a minute, Kevin. I mean, I want people to know I was angry at organized religion after the genocide. And I would see a church building that sat empty most days of the week, except for the time of worship. And I'm like, serious? But I realized my critical, judgmental attitude towards the church wasn't helping anybody. And I also am grateful for so many of the things that my loving family and a loving church family gave to me in my growing up years and supported, and even afterwards. And I realized your anger is misguided here. Just like my anger at the U.S. government was misguided and my anger at organized religion was misguided. And I'm getting to a place, my wife and I talk about this all the time, and I'm like, thank you for your patience, because I don't want to be angry at the church, but I don't know what else to do. And I am learning that my anger was misguided, not that the church didn't fail, I do believe, but don't just stop there. We look at why, and how can I make a difference? It's always easier to point at somebody else. So how can I make a difference? And so I really, in the same way that with Gregoire, or I would say Maria with Filbert, is looking for the good, I am trying now to rewire my brain to really not be dominated by one thing thinking the church's failure in Rwanda, but to look for the good. And how can I be part of that good? I feel a little better now.
Very good.
Thanks.
Anyone else from the audience here? All right. A question for myself, one more online, and maybe we can start to wrap it up. We'll give one more second if there's anybody else. But this is from a couple of years ago on Facebook. I posted a question that was sort of provocative to me at the time. It was from Desmond Tutu, and he said, "There are no evil people, only people who have committed evil acts. There are no monsters, only people that have committed monstrous acts." And it got a reaction, just like these sorts of detail. When you have experienced the worst of the worst, it's hard to imagine the possibility that these people are not, in their depths, evil. But what I hear you saying, and maybe what I also see Jesus saying, is a reframing to look, even in these monstrous acts, to recognize that, yes, this was really bad, but the person that committed it maybe can be redeemed. Is that what you're saying? Explore that a little bit more.
Yeah. One guy that I've been learning a fair amount of things from, he says there's the truth of our being and the way of our being. The truth of our being, who we are at the core, which is where I was headed with the church. We're made in the image of God. We have an extension of the heart, the love of God in each one of us, the truth of our being. The way of our being is our thinking and actions. And we would always say, the Bible quote, and I'm not saying this is wrong or anything, but we'd always say, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. Now, the way I understand that now, and I just kind of barely alluded to it earlier, is that I believe I've lived a lot of my life out of a false construct for who I am, which is rotten in the center that needs a Savior to come and change that rotten center. And I've been test driving an idea that, no, Christ is in me. My center is Christ. There is no Carl without Christ. And now for people who don't believe in Christ or God, I'm more than happy to have a conversation and talk about love. And I'm at least at this point in my life, I'm very comfortable in saying God is my framework for love. You may have a different framework for love, and we can talk about that. But God is my framework for love. So if I operate out of the truth of my being, Christ in me, the way of my being for 66 years has been operating out of a different paradigm, a different sense of self. And so it is wrestling with all of these selfish things and stuff. And it's not like I don't wrestle with selfish things now, but shame is a major player in this. When I think or do act something that is selfish, that is unkind, that is not pure, that is not faithful and stuff like that, shame can come to me and say, see, I told you, you are rotten inside. And I'm like, no, I used to believe that, but I'm not anymore. You don't have any place here. Well, what about that thinking and those actions? I'm like, they were not in line with Christ in me. So guilt is my ally here. Guilt is telling me that my actions and thinking are not in line with Christ in me. And that helps me realign. And of course, I believe you could say guilt, we can talk Holy Spirit, there's a lot of things that we can do there. So this idea of the truth of my being and the way of my being, we haven't usually separated that. We've just kind of said, he's a killer, he's this, he's that, the devil incarnate and all these things. And I'm like, no, I think it's really important to separate these two, not for lack of, to provide no accountability or anything. We are accountable, but man, it is so beautiful when you think Christ is in me, love is in me. I am learning to live with that belief, and it really does change my thinking and my actions. So that being able to differentiate, and that's for me. What about with somebody like Gregoire? Or what about the quote jerk who cuts me off on the freeway? The ordinary things in life. And those I want to respond to with curiosity, not with judgment. So thanks for that.
Question here, and then maybe we'll wrap it up with your final thoughts.
Jesus of Nazareth has certainly joined the ranks of those who have been quoted and misquoted many times through history. And I'm curious about a quote of his. Hitler, of course, was very good at that. Kevin and I were talking about that at potluck. So easy to take a quote, take it out of context, change things around. One of the common ones that occurred to me afterwards was the swastika, which is a reverse of a Buddhist symbol.
Right.
Hitler loved the mystical idea of religion, making it powerful if he could find out how to do it. So that kind of thing was going on. But I'm just curious, there was, of course, Dan's a beautiful quote, but for a lot of people, it's a tough one because it's very flat out, blunt, a quote of Jesus of Nazareth, and you were talking about dealing with Gregoire and others. So the quote is, obey those who govern you and the laws by which they govern. How did you deal with that? Or did that even occur to you? With all the graphic violence you were going through, that is enough to throw it off balance completely and say, I didn't even know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But if that is the case, how did you reconcile that if indeed you did deal with it? Because that's what Gregoire was doing.
Yeah.
What he was doing was
You're right.
obeying what little law or order he had to even go by.
Yeah.
This is my job. This is
Yeah.
what I do.
Yeah.
Mandela had the same thing with the man who stood guard over him for 27 years.
Right.
And he
Right.
hired him.
Right.
Yeah, he said, no, he was a good man. But that's the only thing he knew, and he did a good job. He wasn't cruel to me. He wasn't mean-spirited.
Wow.
He did his job.
Wow.
And I have hired him because I know I can count on him.
Wow.
So I was just curious, how do you deal with that issue?
Boy, I like that. And I've been appreciating, I was telling someone earlier, when you're looking, you're trying to see, is what I'm saying making sense? And you're an active listener that I've really appreciated today as we've been talking. And I like what you're saying there. It makes sense. And I didn't, I was working with people who were committing genocide. We were forming different kinds of, I don't know if I can't say alliances, but partnerships and things like that. I was I was buying powdered milk that was stolen from thieves. Doesn't sound ethical. I was storing that powdered milk in the office of the colonel who was in charge of the genocide in the capital city. At one point, I'm asking the prime minister to stop a massacre. So I'm in and out of these relationships all the time. And I got a lot of comfort from Samantha Power's book, Chasing the Flame, talks about the UN, their different missions around the world, and she looks specifically through the lens of one Brazilian UN diplomat, lifetime diplomat, Sergio, I believe you say Vildemero, but if you check out this book, Chasing the Flame, and one of the things that I really appreciated as I read through that book was when he was working in Cambodia and they were repatriating the Cambodians after the Cambodian genocide from Vietnam. And in one part of Cambodia, it was still controlled by the Khmer Rouge, the ones who had done genocide. So the UN is telling Sergio, you can't deal with them. They did genocide. He's saying farmers are going to be going back to that part of the country. We have to do everything we can to make for a safe return for them. So he goes through backdoor channels and he meets them. It's a really interesting story. But the line that stuck with me from that was those people would have to be brought to justice. But today wasn't the day. And so keeping in mind while we are doing this, that no, this is not, we are not ideologically aligned at all. But the pastor who really, I just credit so much of not knowing what to do, and he was my guide and my, you know, this source of wisdom and things like that. He said to me, at about the 3-week point, when I said, I'm glad we're all still alive, but there's got to be more. And he says, well, Carl, if you're going to do anything outside of the house, you've got to build a relationship with the people in power. Well, the people in power are committing genocide. So I don't know how to really, that specific text, I'm not trying to dance around that. It takes many pieces to make the pie or the cake or the recipe or whatever. And we're looking at all these different things that Jesus taught. And, you know, and we're looking, and if I'm gonna be like a one verse follower of Jesus, it's gonna be love the Lord with all your heart and all your mind, soul, and your neighbor as yourself. And so, but I do think that there's a lot of wisdom. We can write off governments and we can say, for example, you know, this is corrupt, like people say about Rwanda. They'll criticize their president, making no reference or credit to thousands of other government workers who are working for the shared common good of the community there. So trying to have that bigger lens and recognize it's more than a person, I think is helpful at times. They need to be brought to justice. Today is not their day. Really believing that no matter what people are involved in, the truth of their being, they may not even be aware of. But if I live, and I'm not like I'm smarter than everyone else, I know what you don't know. No, but I believe that the way of a person's being is Christ, the heart of Christ in us, which is my framework. And if somebody doesn't believe in Christ, they believe the way is love. I don't think God's like, no, you better call me Christ. You know? So thank you for that. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah.
Carl, you can wrap it up here. But the final question we had online was, how can we take these lessons from Rwanda and enable us to love our community better? But what you've been saying, but wrap it up however you feel fit.
Sure, thanks. Teresa and I, you know, each morning we're reading something together, sharing together, whether we're in person or I'm traveling and she's driving to work or something. And not long ago, I had read a piece about love, and somehow tied in with it was the second glance. And the idea of how often at the first glance, my first glance is a glance of productivity, a glance of logic, a glance of selfishness. My first glance is often what's in it for me, type of that. But if I say, whoa, take a second glance. And that second glance comes from, for me and my understanding of God and the Trinity, that second glance comes from a love relationship where the Father has the back of the Son and the Son has the back of the Spirit and the Spirit has the back. And it is this loving circle relationship. And I can be part of that loving circle. So what if at the end of the day, when I say to Teresa or Teresa says to me, how was your day? I say a productive day. I'm like, oh, that's good. But what if at the end of the day I say, oh, it was a loving day? It was a day where I saw love. I so appreciated in the service earlier today talking about the simple beauties that was part of that, whether it's the leaf and it's the smile, it's the all around us. Love is there. Our brain naturally goes to the negative because it's got to keep us alive. But most of the time we don't need that much negativity, but what we end up there. So to actually intentionally look for the good, look for the beautiful. I don't like to say it like a scale, but a scale still is not a bad thing, because we get involved in the activist community in many ways of really going after injustices and going after inequalities and harm that's happening, and we must. But I feel like if that greatly outweighs my pursuit of beauty and love and peace and centered contentment for me in Christ, I'm headed for a train wreck. And so I try not to spend, like sometimes I don't watch news. I can read and listen and stuff, but I'm trying to keep looking for the good and the beauty while not burying my head in the sand. And then it's the circle right here. That is where Christ is. Christ is in now, present, not in the future, not in the past. Christ is here in the present and here in this place. So when I keep that in mind and the idea of love, and I try to train myself the second glance, those are things that I think that's working for me. I mean, I'm not got it all figured out, not all Mr. 100% happy everything, but those are some valuable tools for me. Thanks.
Let's give Carl a hand. And Teresa.
Thank you.
We're so thankful to have you both with us for this short weekend. And these are lessons that we can learn again and again. Pray with me now as we ask for God to come into this church, in our homes, so we can implement these lessons in our lives. Dear God in heaven, as we reflect on this Sabbath day and ask for the promise and presence of your peace, may we so embody it that we can extend it to those within our sphere of influence. It is a tragedy that the church has not always represented you throughout recent and past history. And my prayer is, starting right here within the Green Lake Church, as there's different opinions on a variety of topics, may we be the church and reflect Christ in loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. Give us the compassion and grace that helps transform a world, to enable us to take those olive branches extended across the aisle and love one another as you've called us to. It is in this way that Jesus said the litmus test is this: they'll know that we are Christians by our love. So help us to remember, to reflect, and to put into practice, starting in our own homes and going out from there. We pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending, for those online as well. And in the last couple of moments that we have, I think you could probably, if you haven't gotten a book, grab one and talk to Carl and Teresa before they head back to Spokane.